Hi, Neema. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, and you. Hi.
Hi, looking forward to having a chat today. So I thought we'd just kick straight off with some questions about you and your marketing journey. So could you just share with me how you first got into marketing, and really what drew you to the field?
Yeah, so it's a bit random actually because I did a law degree and realized pretty much day one of the course that I really didn't want to be a lawyer. I just really knew it wasn't for me. And so during uni, I did look at, the people, their agencies and things, ad agencies coming in, and just thought, oh, actually, it'd be quite nice to work for an ad agency. So I looked at that. And what really drew me was this mix of creativity and insight. I was going to say left brain, right brain, but I think they've debunked that and that the fact there isn't like those two differences. But you're just using those two elements together, and that really appealed to me. So I literally wrote some different agencies for work experience. I was applying alongside that. I think I wrote to 70 in total. Managed to get a couple of weeks work experience, but it happened to be at an agency who had Sky as a client,
Right.
and they were looking for a marketing exec. So I actually went client side there and realized, oh yeah, no, client side is for me. I think this is going to be a really interesting challenge. I really liked sort of going deep into a brand, and learning all different facets. So yeah, and then I've been client side since then, but up until actually recently. But
Right.
yes, that's how I sort of got into
Wow.
working the
Did
business.
you actually complete your law degree then, or did you
Yeah,
realize early enough?
no, I mean, what I should have done that first week was change to the English literature. I even thought about it, but I just didn't have the confidence at that age. I definitely, if I was older and I was doing that again, I definitely would have changed something like English literature. But look, it's a great degree to have, and it has actually been quite helpful in marketing as well. And obviously, we always have to get everything checked from a legal point of view anyway, and from a communications point of view. So it's not hindered me, but it's not necessarily what I would do if I did it again.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So you said you spent some time at an agency. How long did you spend there?
Literally, I think it was a few weeks, and then
Oh,
that
right.
role came up because it was work experience. It wasn't a full role,
Yeah.
and I think yeah, they just said, oh, our client's looking for a marketing exec, you might like to go for the role, and I got the job. So yeah, I was there a couple of years, and then I moved to BBC Studios, and that was a mix of B2B and then some B2C. So basically, working with the sales teams at BBC Studios to sell BBC TV shows across the world, and also working directly with international broadcasters on their marketing campaigns for the shows. So worked on things like Little Britain and yeah, some really diverse, and Planet Earth, and very diverse sort of shows.
Wow.
So that was really interesting. And what was particularly interesting for me from that point of view was the regionalization of marketing and how
Mm.
you need to change it for different audiences, and that was really helpful. And then yeah, from there I went on to Sky. So I worked in the brand team at Sky. So that was fully B2C, working with different teams across Sky. It was really interesting because I got to work on, I don't know, like a promotion or partnership for Sky Sports one day, or it could be working on something for Sky Broadband another day. So it was really diverse, and it's coming up with promotions and partnerships, working on lots of different things across that for a couple of years, and then moved to Freeview. And I was actually worked up the team at Freeview, and was there for 13 years in total in different roles, most
Wow.
as head of marketing and consumer comms.
Goodness me. So that sort of chance role to start with kind of kickstarted your whole
Absolutely.
career in marketing in broadcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. And it's been brilliant.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So would you change anything if you went back to the start other than switching degrees, perhaps?
Well, yeah, definitely that. I don't know about necessarily at the start, and as brilliant as it's been working in media, I really love it as a sector. And actually, the roles that I've done have given me exposure to different brands. So, working on brand partnerships at Sky, I worked with everyone from like Merlin Entertainment to Paramount Pictures.
Yeah.
And at Freeview, I set up strategic partnerships with consumer electronics brands, with retailers, with other types of brands to extend our marketing footprint.
Mm,
Happy to talk a bit more about that. But that again gave me a good insight into different sectors at quite a level of depth.
yeah.
But ideally, I would have maybe looked at working in a different sector earlier on in my career, because even if I became a specialist in media, I think it can give you some really interesting insights that you can bring to a different sector. So that might have been helpful, but actually it sort of worked out, but in a slightly different way through my career anyway.
Yeah. Have there been any other sectors that you've looked at over the years and thought, actually, I would have really loved to have sort of got your teeth into that?
Yeah, I mean, I find other sectors definitely interesting. I mean, obviously leisure and entertainment sectors make sense and in
Yeah.
conjunction with what I've done. Consumer tech, I mean, Freeview is a consumer tech brand as well,
Yeah.
Sky. So, but maybe getting a bit more into that side of things and being able to use that. But I'm quite open. Travel would be brilliant as well. So lots of other options there, I think, which is sort of transferable to an
Yeah.
extent as well.
Yeah. So how many years, do you mind me asking, have you been in the sector and in marketing in
So it's been
total?
20 plus now. So yeah, I
Right.
did take some time out though during that period. So I did a year's travel and I went to live in New York, excuse me, and
Wow.
worked for a circus.
Wow. Tell me more about that.
Bit random. I applied for an internship early in my career and I really wanted to just go and work in New York. And they placed you in different businesses. And, my other fellow interns were getting placed with places like Citibank.
Yeah. So very corporate.
And I thought maybe, I'll go to Madison Avenue and I'll get to do all this.
Yeah.
But they said, well, we've got this, it's the Big Apple Circus, but it was the events team at this circus. So it was a full-fledged circus, but it was a very famous circus.
Right.
So De Niro used to come to it. So I feel
Okay.
it was mentioned on Friends once, so it's a bit of a random
Yeah.
experience. But actually, it was amazing. So I was working on special events, fundraising events to raise charity for the circus. So actually, it was a brilliant experience, but quite different.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah. I bet that looked good on your CV for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
So have you got any advice for somebody who might just be embarking on a marketing career or somebody who's thinking about going into marketing?
Yeah, I think the thing that I've definitely learned is to be open-minded. And I mean that in two ways. So firstly, from a career point of view, I mean, I think it's obviously helpful, particularly, I think, in today's challenging market, to have an idea of where you want to head, but to also be open to different experiences. And whether that's within a role and someone suggests, oh, would you like to help on this? Obviously being open to those sorts of things. Or whether it's the next job you're thinking about doing and maybe thinking a bit more open-mindedly about that, but also as a marketeer being open-minded, so not being blinkered, whether it's when you're presented with research and you have quite a fixed idea of what you think something should be. Obviously sometimes research can throw you a bit and you do need to make sure it's robust, and sometimes it does need a bit more delving into. But equally, I have seen sometimes people have their own view of what something should be, and it's completely at odds with what the data says. And obviously the data is a much bigger pool of people and so on. And there's a reason that you're doing that research. So really being open-minded in whatever aspect that might be, because I think it can really lead to interesting things and interesting solutions.
Yeah, agreed. So I read a lot about people saying that marketers need to put their ego to one side. They are not the customer. Put your ego to one side and trust the data. So it's your target audience is telling you what they want. So you have to go and listen to that and not decide, well, I don't like that, so I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, so let's dig into where you've worked, what you've done. So should we talk a bit about the balance between kind of branding and performance? So obviously you've worked and had focus on both of those areas, brand marketing, performance marketing. How do you think that they complement each other, and how have you managed that challenge?
Yeah, so I think, as I said, I worked in the brand team at Sky, and then at Freeview, it was a really broad role. So as you say, the brand strategy, acquisition, retention, I was managing all of those things. So I mean, a really 360 view of how you sort of deliver a brand to consumers. For me, I'm a big advocate of brand. I feel like it sometimes gets a bit of a bad press, and there seems to be a real, sorry, excuse the pun, growth in growth marketing roles and performance marketing roles. And there's absolutely, obviously, a role for that. But I sometimes think that the brand part of that can be a little bit undervalued. I do understand why sometimes, like, especially if you're a smaller brand, it can be harder to make the case for investment in brand.
Yeah.
But I do think they're very complementary. And there's various studies that show that brand marketing does have an effect on performance marketing. It's going to make it work more efficiently.
Of course, yeah.
So, there's obviously the famous ones like IPA, like Binet and Field studies, the long and short of it. But there's more recent studies. There's one called Profitability 2, which is Kantar and various other agencies like Mindshare came together and looked at the role of brand marketing, and they make the case for it in terms of its effectiveness. That study in particular showed, I think there's a perception that brand marketing takes a long time to take effect. That study, Profitability 2, so it's 2 words, profitability, they showed that brand marketing, even in the immediate term, can have some effect on big business metrics such as profit, lifetime value, things like that. And therefore, and this was like looking at different media channels. So it's, even something like TV, which obviously has a direct response role, but it is also very much a brand media, and actually was driving the second most effective level of business metrics after generic search, which is obviously performance.
Yeah.
So I think don't sort of lose sight of that, and don't think that it's going to take obviously the longer term effects are the ones where you really make a difference. But that's one aspect. And then what does performance do? Well, performance, obviously, if it's working effectively, that can also give you some signals as to how your brand is doing. So what traffic is being driven to where, what consumers finding most interesting, that gives you a sense of what you should be doing on the brand building side. So I very much think we complement each other.
Yeah, and what sort of measurement techniques would you use to gauge the effectiveness of either brand or performance marketing?
Yeah, so I think that's another reason why I think people quite like performance marketing, is because it is so measurable.
Yeah.
In the digital space, particularly, obviously, Google Analytics or proprietary data or whatever tools you're using for digital marketing, social, those sorts of things, a lot easier to measure. So that's reasonably straightforward. But then, it's the brand side that I think sometimes trips people up a little bit. So, for example, at Freeview, we had a brand tracker, most recently delivered by YouGov, previously by other well-known figures. So you can go down that route. Not everyone can obviously afford a regular brand tracker, but even doing dips, we had a monthly one, but you could do dips on a quarterly or a twice yearly basis and things like that. And that would measure things like spontaneous and prompted brand awareness, consideration, brand connection, things like recognition and those sorts of things. Well, that gives you a sense of how everything is doing as well. You can also use, for example, when you're creating new creative for TV media, we use things like System One. So they have proprietary data that can help you get a sense of how is this going to do at a brand level, and then what's the performance going to be at a business level. So there's lots of different tools out there now that you can use.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think that brand marketing has the perception of being more difficult to gauge, so therefore not as effective, which is just not true.
Yeah, exactly. And also, in the longer term, if you're seeing an increase in performance marketing, but you're actually doing the same level of performance marketing in terms of the results, you're getting a better performance, then that suggests the brand
is becoming better known and better regarded. Yeah. So just sort of going back to the Freeview example. So obviously that was a challenger brand. I think that's fair to say. And what was the budget like for Freeview? Was it limited?
So what's interesting about that is, in the one sense, it was a challenger brand because of the budgets, which I'll come to in a moment. But actually, it was the number one TV and is the number one TV platform in the UK, well above platforms such as Sky and Virgin. But when you looked at and we did analysis around this, like when we looked at the budgets for the whole sector, and you bring in Netflix and others, we had about 1% of the total sector's budget.
Wow.
So, we were able to get quite a lot of TV media because of the shareholders. That included BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Sky, but it was still obviously not as big. So having to be really clever and savvy about how you're using your media is one thing. Another thing I would say is where you don't have the media spend of your competitors, actually the focus on creative becomes more important, because that's where you can potentially steal share of voice without the media spend that goes with it.
Yeah.
So we put a lot of them, and that's why, like I said, we use things like System One. There's another brilliant agency called The Nursery for bespoke creative research, really honing in on that to help us understand particularly our, not just our TV advertising, but the brand platform as a whole is really effective. That was another thing. And then the other thing that we started to do, and as I said, like we launched a series of strategic partnerships, and they were done on a contra basis. No money necessarily exchanging hands, but working with different types of partners, offering up our inventory for co-branded marketing, and in return, getting different channels, particularly those channels that we didn't necessarily have the cash budgets to be. So yeah, I was responsible for setting that up, going out to talk to partners, putting the whole partnership together.
Yeah.
Looking at the performance of those. That's a way, obviously you've got to get it right in terms of the right types of brands.
Yeah.
Really like finding like-minded brands that can give you a halo effect in terms of similar brand values, but will also potentially bring in some growth through audiences that wouldn't necessarily consider you. That was another way that really helped us to stand out.
And that was a big success for you.
Yeah, hugely successful. I mean, we started with a very small allocation within the budget, and we were in 7 figures. Once towards the end of my sort of tenure there, we were on 7 figures.
Wow, that's fantastic. Are there any other sort of examples of really creative campaigns or creative ideas that came out?
Yeah, so I mean, one example is we did something really interesting. This was off the back of a pitch, actually, working with a brilliant agency called Anomaly. So they talked about how instead of doing sort of traditional TV ads, they created this thing called The Other Way. And the idea was that the TV spots would actually be bought and sit next to TV programming, and they would feel more like the continuity announcements. And so we had sort of a voiceover, and then there was someone in a lighthearted and fun way talking about the actual shows that were about to appear. So, for example, we would appear next to Bake Off, and there would be an ad that would talk about that, but that looked more like a continuity announcement than an actual ad. And it was a way to get closer to the content that we were obviously trying to promote, but also do it in a slightly different way, in a more brand-led way. It was actually a really successful campaign for us in terms of metrics. The challenge we had, and it was a few years back, it required a lot of heavy lifting because it was quite a personalised campaign in terms of the shows that we were referencing. I think if I was going to do it again now, there's a lot more, tech available to make that a lot more efficient, probably leaning a bit into things like AI. But at the time, it was really resource heavy. We were obviously a small team. So, ran really, won awards as well. But ultimately, the reason we had to shift was that it was just too resource heavy.
Yeah.
That was quite an interesting learning for me, in that, you can buy brilliant campaigns, but brilliant campaigns, but just remembering the sort of logistics and the practical side of that as well. As it happened, we did move to a different campaign. It was our most successful ever, so it worked in our favor. But
wow,
it's interesting experience.
Yeah, and I guess as a sort of underdog or challenger brand, do you have a bit more flexibility with what you can do and sort of how creative you can be, or is that one of the sort of advantages of having a smaller brand awareness, if you like?
Yeah, I think that one of the things about that is you can have quite a clear positioning. And where you sit within the market, and it's quite an understandable positioning. I think it's also easier to build trust with consumers because you might be perceived as, we're a free TV service up against paid providers. So I think from that point of view, it's a bit easier to build that trust. I mean, we had strong levels of trust anyway.
Yeah.
I think the challenges actually are things like, for example, team motivation.
Right.
On the one, I was lucky. I had an amazing team, and they were up for anything. They would, get stuck in, and we'd give it a go, which is great. But, you do have to keep that morale up because you recognise that there are certain ideas that we can't go with, and that other competitors would be able to, or just recognising that you have got these smaller budgets, and that's quite a scary thought sometimes. So think really building that motivation in the team and finding ways to be creative. Another thing we actually did was we'd invite other brands in. So we didn't necessarily have the budgets to be able to do masses and masses of research, for example.
Right.
But you can invite, we all had contacts at different brands, invite people in, ask them what worked for them. It's just really interesting to hear. It's a free way of getting insight and building relationships at the same time.
Yeah, it's very collaborative.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just leaning into the positives of what a challenger brand is. And yeah, I think there was an element of freedom in the sense that you can try different things, and some things initially fall under the radar anyway because you haven't put masses and masses of spend against something.
Yeah.
You take time to sort of build those up, and we do a lot of test and learns as well. And that's another, obviously for any marketer, that's important.
Yeah.
Particularly where you've got smaller budgets.
Yeah, just being iterative and kind of building on what's working for you. So just talking about sort of evolving the brand identity, how do you do that whilst you're also balancing expectations and kind of managing those core values versus, being aspirational?
Yeah, so we did actually go through that task at Freeview. So when we launched a new product, Freeview Play, it was more streaming led in terms of, more broadband led as an offering, and therefore designed to appeal to younger audiences as well as older. And the Freeview Heartland tends to be a bit older. So looked at the sort of shift we needed to make. I think what comes out is what you don't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No.
We looked at the data around what were the things that we were strongest on. We definitely didn't want to lose those.
Yeah.
But what were the areas then that we were finding more challenging with different audiences? And then looking through, again, an iterative approach and then doing research at different points, whether that was once you had an initial brand identity or a bit further down the line, is looking at whether that would still work with your current audience as well as your newer audiences.
Yeah.
And therefore, once again, it comes back to data. It comes back to doing
keeping the consumer at the heart. Yeah.
Exactly that. And then also just having that North Star, being really clear in that positioning, making sure everyone understands what the positioning is. And as you develop or evolve a brand, the usual things still apply: brand guidelines, strong tone of voice, everyone being really clear on what they stand for, even if they're not having a direct conversation with you, other people in the business.
Yeah.
Really clear on what that brand is, and if it has changed, doing that communication job as well.
Yeah, and kind of adding the ICPs as you evolve those, adding them to the existing ICPs and making sure you're not forgetting about those original consumers. Yeah. No, I think that's really important. So you did a lot of market research, did a lot of testing, you did a lot of speaking to the customers.
Yeah, exactly that. So we created refined ICPs, working in conjunction with our media agency and our insight team. And we sort of start with that, with a specific focus on brand and what brand values are sort of coming out and things like that.
Yeah.
And then as and when needed. So there was some research on the visual identity. There was some on, obviously, the positioning. I also worked on a totally new brand, Freely, and that launched in April this year, just as I was leaving Freeview. So that was really interesting because actually it was from scratch.
Right.
So audience research, it was the naming, it was positioning, proposition, visual identity, all of that. So and it's quite rare to work on a brand from scratch, generally, and usually in
unless it's a startup, which obviously Freeview is not. But
sort of bigger brand content, really unusual. So that was really interesting to do as well. But yeah, I think when you've got an existing brand, it's keeping an eye on what has gone before.
Yeah.
Accepting where are the areas that you can shift and move without losing what you had before.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds interesting. The Freely, I'll have to have a look at that. I haven't heard of it yet, but okay. So we talked about the brand building versus the performance marketing and the measurement of that. So, you've worked with major brands like Sky and Freeview. And I guess, have you learned anything that could be transferable to a much smaller business? I mean, obviously with that Freely project, that was almost like a startup. So are those skills and those activities transferable to smaller businesses?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is, again, I think I can understand, particularly for smaller brands, why brand marketing can feel a bit scary. It's harder to make the case to invest in that. So, but one thing I would say is to try and do at least a bit of brand marketing. Actually, Mark Ritson talks about, the classic sort of number is 60 brand, 40 performance is the recommended amount as a whole. But then within sectors, it can sort of vary. But he actually talks about how if you're a smaller brand, you might not be able to do 60-40. That is probably quite scary to talk to investors about.
Yeah.
But you could start with a smaller amount, or you could, from my point of view, I think another thing you could think about doing is looking at trying to do it on a smaller basis. So, for example, is there a region where you could do more brand advertising to make the case?
Yeah, like a test case area.
Yeah, I mean, that needs some thinking through, and like I said, it has to be quite long term. But yeah, you could allocate a portion of your budget to having more of a, a brand performance mix. And then that's an easier case to make back to investors. So, but I would advocate, if not for totally new brands, I think totally new brands, you do need a fair emphasis on performance. But as you sort of build and grow and scale up, I think bringing in brand a bit earlier than maybe some brands would consider could work quite well. And then the other thing is to talk about, as I said, partnerships, I think are a really great way, again, you have to be careful with the partnership side of things, especially if you're a newer brand, because you're still trying to establish your own brand. And if you've got co-branded activity,
dilution, yeah.
And the other brand is bigger, then it can be a bit of a challenge. But for example, GoPro have grew massively, really increased their revenue and other business metrics through working with Red Bull. Their partnership's really long-standing, and they were obviously the smaller of the two brands, but it's worked really well. And the reason is because their brand values sort of fit. GoPro is all, adventure, excitement. Red Bull is about, they've for a long time have been very much focused on that. So audiences are similar, so that's worked really well for them. But I think you can get that balance right around your own brand and another brand, it can work really well.
Yeah, I've noticed, you can't miss the Surreal cereal ads everywhere. They are really strong on partnerships, aren't they? And partnering with kind of brands with a similar ethos. And yeah, I think it does work really well. I would say that the benefits of partnering outweigh the challenges of potentially diluting the message, especially with a bigger brand.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you can do it on a smaller basis, and then
of course.
Then you can go out and then you haven't, you're not too worried about brand reputation and whatever's happening from that point of view as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good idea. That's great. So I was just going to ask you some questions about MarTech and AI specifically, because I'm very interested in the way that that's all evolving. I mean, you've obviously led some fairly large teams. Do you have a sort of preferred tech stack that you would absolutely want to take with you to your next position, or that you would recommend to any business?
Well, what's actually interesting is that we worked a lot with external agencies. So a lot of the tech stack came from them, either through proprietary data. Some of them had their own tools. And we worked with, I will just sort of name drop an agency that I absolutely love, NMPI, who did all our digital advertising, really great tools. But alongside that, we were using things like MailChimp for our e-newsletter, Monday.com to help us with our planning. And I still use that and would continue in whatever capacity, to be honest, use that. And obviously Google Analytics and things like that for the website. But there were a lot of other sort of more specific. Personally, I also use Notion, which is more for just keeping track of my to-do lists and
project management. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, those were some of the key ones.
Yeah. And what about the whole AI evolution? I know you touched on it briefly earlier about content creation and personalization. So are you embracing AI tools?
Yeah, I think AI is such an interesting area. I mean, clearly from a personalization point of view, it can be really good. And at Freeview, we used various tools, but one that we used was Gum, and it's something that uses AI. It's AI driven, but it gets around the challenges of not having first party data. So what it does is it can look at the context of articles online, and it can therefore obviously make some decisions about who you are as a person and what you're interested in. and then serve some advertising around that. It's all AI driven. And that actually had really great results for us. So I definitely can see a place for it. But I do think it's really interesting times for us from an AI point of view, as marketeers. I think there's a lot of things that I feel like aren't talked about enough whilst we sort of move into this new world. So one, for example, is even on the search side, I mean, there's a challenge there for us as brands because the more that you don't need to go to a search engine to look at different links, how does that affect us as brands? So does that, for example, mean more of an emphasis on other channels like social, where you can still own that channel a little bit more?
Yeah.
If they don't obviously start dabbling a lot more in AI as well, I don't know. But, you know, that's interesting to look at. Our other owned media, like, I mean, newsletters are a bit of resurgence, particularly amongst content creators and younger audiences. Surprising. I never thought would happen, but has happened. You know, are we going to need to sort of emphasize that a bit more again? Because it is a way to get in front of consumers, but you've got to sign them up in the first place if they're not coming to your site. So there's all these sorts of things to think about. The quality of that search, you know, I actually did a search for a brand I've worked with, and it was Google Gemini, and some of the information was incorrect. You know, there's still that challenge. It's still making sure that your brand is being represented properly.
Yeah.
And then there's other things. So there's the sustainability side. So AI uses masses of data.
Yeah.
And, you know, just in the same way that consumers are looking more and more at brand sustainability policies, but also their diversity policies, I suspect from a brand point of view, consumers are going to be looking at how brands are using AI, both from a sustainability point of view, what's our carbon footprint, could also be, you know, if over time certain jobs are being lost, are consumers going to be a bit concerned about brands that are heavily reliant on AI, for example? All these big questions that go around in my head, as you can tell.
Yeah, so it's got the carbon footprint element, but it's also got the social element to it as well. I think there are some quite serious ethical considerations to think about.
Yeah, I think so. And so, you know, as a brand marketer, that is what I would be thinking about as well.
Yeah.
How much scrutiny will there be on my brand and how I'm using AI? But I do think in the effectiveness space, in terms of, you know, sort of process and some of those aspects where there's maybe less of an ethical consideration around it's not necessarily taking as many jobs as such, helping you to organize your marketing, or your work projects and stuff like that, then I think it's probably fine. But I'm really interested to see what happens next in that area.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I think there's already kind of a focus on cloud carbon output. So I would say that when that catches up, then the whole AI data consumption piece will come up as an issue as well, particularly for sort of larger companies that are maybe putting out RFPs, or I would have thought that will actually come up in sustainability reports.
Exactly.
Soon.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, IPA already have some guidelines around carbon footprint of media. Need them sort of like moving into that space as well. And there are things that we will quite quickly have to think about, I think, as marketers.
Yeah, I think so. And internal policies, etc., just governing, because, you know, if an AI search takes 10 times more power than a Google search, for example.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I suspect some of that emphasis will go back onto the likes of Google, and it already is in terms of the data. You know, we as marketers can still make decisions about who we work with, and making sure that chain is still reasonably what consumers would consider ethical, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. And absolutely, I think that whole sort of search piece is really interesting. I think, you know, everyone's going to sort of have to rethink the way they're doing SEO, and it'll become AI SEO. That will, I'm sure, give rise to a whole new slew of professionals who promise to get you ranking on AI engines.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that just almost is a shift, like just a new set of experts.
A new SEO.
Slightly different area. But yeah, I totally agree. I think that will become more important.
Mm.
And even like I know Google Gemini now and things like Perplexity AI, they do have sort of sources. But
Yes,
how many
yeah.
people are going to click on those? If you're in a rush, I don't think there's that many. And then there's also, the New York Times is currently in a legal battle around with OpenAI and Microsoft around whether they'll even offer up their content, and if they do, how will it be monitored? So it's such an interesting time. But yeah, in the whole space.
Yeah. How do you see it all evolving then in the next sort of 5 to 10 years? I mean, it's moving so fast right now. I think 5 to 10 years is kind of, we can't even imagine. But what's your sort of thought process on tech?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's going to shift the landscape in possibly a way that we've never seen before in all of our working sort of careers. How exactly is tricky to say. I think there will be more, probably from a content point of view, there'll probably be more licensing deals done. I saw that so I think they're called SAG, so Screen Actors Guild in America, which is like major, they're the ones that initiated the writers' strike, have done a deal with Narrative, who are AI based company, so that they have got in early on those things. So that whole area is going to be interesting, whether, obviously some of that is indirect when it comes to brand. It's all in that space, and it'll be interesting to see how that sort of plays out. I actually think, I hope that the human touch becomes more important than ever in a sense, because I don't think, however much some of this stuff can help us, I think people do still want, for certain aspects, will want to, talk to human beings, want to think about human beings, sort of thoughts, feelings, and so on.
Yeah, I feel like that might be the premium. The human element might be the premium option, where scalable, kind of repeatable is AI based. I think the human element will then become, I was thinking about the sort of animation piece. You can create a short animation using AI, but then will that make human illustration and human animation so much more premium? Because you've always got space for artisans in every sector. So I think that probably will be the same for content creation. Anything that's kind of human created should actually become a premium product, if you like.
That's exactly what I think would probably happen. I think also, there's 2 points I was going to make. One is around, so Coca-Cola, they did their whole year in AI. A System One actually researched that, and they said that, it did as well as other.
I saw that.
Yeah, but obviously it is based on an existing idea that a human being came up with. So I looked at it, and I mean, I wished I hadn't known it was AI. I did feel it was a little bit, there's just something missing. The human beings who are obviously AI generated, but obviously AI is just going to improve and improve. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah.
But I think what AI can do is it can certainly help smaller businesses, because it's going to be much cheaper to build marketing at that level. And then it's a case of just finding a way that your work doesn't look exactly the same as everyone else's.
Exactly.
Because AI still got to have the initial sources to pull from.
Yeah, you can't automate that. You can't automate the initial prompt idea. And if you do, then the results are bland. So yeah, I think you still got to have that human eye and that human creativity overseeing. Just like you have to have the expertise to know that something isn't accurate. So you knew those Google Gemini results were inaccurate. So that's great because you're there, with your level of skill. But what happens when everyone just relies on AI and trusts everything that it says?
Exactly. So yeah, I think though it will move pretty fast. Look, I mean, AI wasn't really even being talked about a few years ago, like not on any mass scale.
No, not on this sort of democratized scale that we're seeing now, where it's so accessible, so affordable, and so kind of in everybody's pocket. It's really taken off in the last couple of years, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, interesting times.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so let's just close out with a piece of advice. If you have a piece of advice for any other marketing leaders who maybe want to succeed in the brand and the performance marketing areas that you've talked about.
Yeah, so I mean, I think just emphasizing that I suppose don't be scared of it, and that you can just try it and experiment. It's not something that has to be set in stone, and you can try it on a smaller scale. So I think experiment is one thing. And
Yeah.
the other thing then is making sure that whatever you're building, you can pull some data that's robust enough to sell into the business. And if you can do those things, I really do think, trying to build in brand alongside any performance marketing that you're doing is going to set you up for longer term success. Yeah,
Yeah.
my main thing.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And it all goes full circle back to the advice for new marketers about
Amazing.
being agile and flexible, because everything changes all the time. So you have to be kind of ready to, switch your priorities from brand to performance, from performance to brand, just as the market demands, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, they complement each other, and
Exactly.
that's how you can really build growth.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The two go hand in hand, don't
Yeah,
they?
exactly.
Okay, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
No, I feel like we've covered quite a lot of things,
We
haven't we?
have, yeah.
No, I think, yeah, I just think it almost comes back to the main point I made about new marketers, but for all marketers, is being open-minded to whatever's coming next
Yeah.
and being ready to sort of move in whatever direction it needs. And I think, as you say, agility is probably going to be one of the biggest skills for marketers in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I actually see marketers as sort of trailblazers, really, with not just tech, but with creativity and creative thinking. I think we really set the tone for a business because we're the ones who are kind of driving change, and we're driving forwards with solutions that match what our consumers want.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much. We'll have to
Thank
talk
you.
again, won't we?
Yeah, exactly. Look, yeah, there's so much to chat about.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we'll
Thank
dig into another area next time.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's been great to chat to you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.